Custer County, Idaho Territory, October 1893. The first snow fell 3 weeks early that year, and by the time most homesteaders realized winter wasn't approaching but arriving, Samuel Hale was digging what looked like a grave beneath his own cabin. The town of Chalice whispered about it for days. Riders slowed their horses when passing his land, staring at the long trench that disappeared under the wooden structure he had built only months earlier. 36 feet of tunnel carved through Idaho soil, descending below the frost line, all for a single fire pit positioned 10 feet away from the house. There was no stovepipe rising from his roof, no iron chimney belching smoke into the sky like every other cabin in the valley. "He's burying himself before the cold does," old rancher Whitcomb muttered at the general store. At 6,000 feet elevation, winter was not a season, but a trial, and Samuel Hale, according to every neighbor within 20 miles, had chosen to face it without a stove inside his house. Samuel had not always been a farmer. Before Idaho, before America, he had been a railway engineer in the Ural Mountains, designing steam tunnels through frozen rock and calculating draft pressures for locomotives that survived sub-zero Russian winters. For 19 years, he studied how heat moved, how steam carried energy through iron pipes for miles, how temperature was less about flame and more about direction. Fire itself meant little if its heat escaped too quickly. When he arrived in Idaho and saw settlers burning enormous wood piles only to sit in cabins barely warmer than freezing, he recognized the flaw immediately. A cast iron stove burned at nearly 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, yet most of that energy rushed straight up the chimney in seconds. 80% of the heat vanished into the sky. A chimney was not a heater, it was an exit wound. So Hale reversed the direction. Instead of letting smoke rise immediately, he forced it sideways and underground. The fire pit sat at the northwest edge of his property, 4 feet deep and lined with granite stone. From its base began a tunnel pitched gently downward, stone-lined and reinforced with pine beams, running beneath his root cellar first, then beneath the livestock shed, and finally under the wooden floorboards of his cabin before rising again to a chimney placed 14 feet higher on the southeast side. The elevation difference created natural suction. Hot air would always rise, pulling smoke through the entire 36-foot passage without mechanical assistance. The tunnel beneath the root cellar widened slightly to allow maximum heat transfer, where only mild warmth was needed to keep vegetables from freezing. Beneath the livestock shed, it curved in a slow S shape, extending the smoke's journey and allowing cattle to stand on ground that would never drop below freezing. Beneath the cabin, Hale constructed a small chamber where smoke slowed and pooled briefly before exiting, surrendering the last of its heat into thick granite walls that would radiate warmth upward through the floor long after the fire burned low. By November, the trench had been sealed, the earth restored, and the system hidden beneath what appeared to be an ordinary homestead. Mockery did not fade. One rancher predicted carbon monoxide would seep through the floorboards. Another insisted the tunnel would flood and collapse during spring thaw. Even Hale's own relatives refused to visit, calling it reckless pride. Hale responded calmly each time. "I'm not fighting winter, I'm reducing waste." But waste was something few settlers believed they could afford to think about. Survival meant burning more wood, not less. Then, January arrived with violence no one had prepared for. On the 3rd, temperatures dropped to -18. By the 5th, -32. On January 8th, an Arctic wind descended from the Sawtooth Range and drove the thermometer to -47 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest recorded temperature in Idaho Territory at that time. Chimneys roared across Custer County. Families fed stoves every 2 hours. Water froze indoors. Root cellars hardened into ice chambers. Livestock died standing in barns that offered no protection. A schoolteacher named Miriam Cross was found frozen in her cabin when her stovepipe cracked overnight and her fire extinguished. Her room measured 21 degrees at sunrise. Wood piles shrank to nothing in a matter of days. At the Hale homestead, one fire burned steadily in the outdoor pit, fed every 6 hours. Smoke slipped into the earth and vanished. Neighbors assumed silence meant death, until Whitcomb noticed something strange while passing on January 10th. The chimney at the far end of Hale's property emitted a thin, steady ribbon of smoke, not violent or desperate, but controlled. Snow on the cabin roof above the buried tunnel had partially melted despite the brutal cold. Curious and unsettled, Whitcomb approached and knocked. The door opened and a wave of warmth rolled outward, not the sharp blast of a roaring stove, but deep, even heat that seemed to rise from below. Whitcomb stepped inside and stared. There was no stove in the center of the room, no fire in the corner, only a wooden table and calm air. He felt warmth pressing through the soles of his boots. Hale pointed silently to the thermometer on the wall. 54 degrees. Outside was -45. They checked the root cellar. 39 degrees, vegetables firm and unfrozen. They checked the livestock shed, 34 degrees, cattle calm and breathing easy. Whitcomb's own barn had fallen below 0 days earlier. He had lost 2 calves. Standing there, feeling the earth itself radiate heat, he understood what Hale had done. The smoke had been forced to work. Instead of escaping in seconds, it had traveled for nearly 40 seconds through granite walls, transferring hundreds of degrees of thermal energy into stone and soil. Granite's high heat capacity allowed it to absorb slowly and release slowly, acting like a battery charged during burn cycles and discharging warmth through the long winter night. The earth itself had become insulation. One flame, maximum extraction, minimum waste. Word spread quickly. Within a week, 5 homesteaders visited. Within 2 weeks, 11. By February, Hale was sketching tunnel layouts for neighbors whose wood piles were nearly gone. Some built longer tunnels, others added branching passages. Each design adapted to land and slope, but the principle remained constant. Smoke carries heat, stone stores heat, and time determines how much is saved. By the end of winter, not a single structure above Hale's tunnel had frozen. He burned less than half the wood of his neighbors. He lost no cattle, no crops, and no sleep. Samuel Hale lived another 27 years on that property. His underground heating system operated without major repair through nearly 30 years of Idaho winters. When modern oil furnaces appeared, he declined them, saying there was no reason to burn twice when once would suffice. After his death, his wife found a journal entry written on the coldest day of 1894. It read, "They say fire must rise straight to heaven, but heaven does not warm children. If smoke must leave, let it leave tired. Let it work for every inch of escape. Flame is not warmth. Warmth is what remains after flame has finished its labor." And for 36 feet beneath a wooden cabin in Idaho Territory, smoke paid rent before it ever touched